Welcome to the CyborgNest podcast, a series of discussions that explore human enhancement, innovative technologies, and the impacts that they have on humanity, the Earth, and our future. On today's podcast, we speak to futures theorist and host of Futures podcast, Luke Robert Mason. Luke has interviewed countless people in the science and technology world, and today we get to hear what he's learned and what he thinks, including his admiration for the proactionary approaches to new technology, strengthening human resilience to harmful technologies, and aspiring to have the mimetic ability to actively influence the future.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Cyborg Nest podcast, to the second chapter of it, the second podcast. And today we have a special guest that I'm very happy to have with us, Luke Robert Mason, who is a British-born futurist, passionate about engaging the public with emerging scientific theories and technological developments. He is the host of Future Podcast, a place where interviews a multitude of scientists, technologists, artists, philosophers, working to disrupt and develop the future of our lives and planet. Thank you for being here, Luke. Such a pleasure. I think how many times does it happen to you that you're in the patient chair and not in the doctor chair?
Well, very few times I have the illness that's required to become a guest for a podcast. So I guess it's nice to be asked. I usually turn it down, weirdly enough. I'm sort of the mindset of what I'm doing right now is trying to sort of work out my POV on such things as the future. But because it's you guys, because it's Cyborg Nest, I agreed to be part of your show. So I'm excited to chat with you.
Oh, thank you so much, mate. And actually, you started saying that you speak to so many people, and when we were thinking about guests, I couldn't not think about you just because of that, because you have such a access, or let's say you speak to so many people from all over the world, and you usually get to have like really long and nice and deep conversations with people. So probably the knowledge that you have in your head is something that is relatively rare to bump into. So I'm very happy to have you here, and wanted to ask you the first thing. You sometimes speak about your biggest dream of it being humanity to survive. And when I read that the first time, I think I understood between the lines what you meant. But could you try to explain what do you mean by that?
Well, the weird thing is, the more sorts of folks that you have conversations with about the future, the more you suddenly start to realize that there is a deep set fear of what may come to pass. And when I jokingly say, I want to live in a future in which humanity survives, I quite facetiously mean that as it stands. Like, I want to be in a future in which human beings are able to continue the way in which they've been living. And it feels like currently there's a self-esteem crisis. Humans, especially humans interested in these notional ideas of the future, are very much obsessed with this idea of existential crises, the sorts of things that may kill us. And these come in a multitude of flavors, from asteroids to biotech outbreak to nanotech to even AI being the thing that's going to fundamentally destroy human beings. And it's weird that we've got into this place where we have a very odd relationship with our own future, and where we believe that it's almost inevitable that we're going to end up destroying ourselves or being destroyed in one way, shape, or form. And I'm fascinated by what actually drives some of those narratives.
So I'll tell you, it's interesting because first of all, I totally agree with you. There is a big buzz around, oh, is there going to be a future? How is that going to look like? Are we going to be here? And I know that, for example, I think it was your last chapter of the podcast where you interviewed a scientist saying that if we want planet Earth to survive, then we shouldn't be here anymore.
Mm.
So it goes that far. Now, I ask myself, is it something that really has to do with what's happening today, or it's something that happens to every generation? And the reason why I think about it is, if you think about teenage years of a person, every generation thinks that they are the most fucked up generation, that everything was fine until they came, right? And you can see that through music, for example, right? If you take Kurt Cobain, and before that Jimi Hendrix and all that, you go backwards, it was other people. And kind of, so is there anything really happening now, or is just another teenage kind of normal kind of thinking that's going on?
Yeah, I certainly think the thing that's different now is the form of isolation under which we live, and that's been exasperated by things like COVID. I mean, it does feel like we are intimately connected through digital technology, but frighteningly alone. And I think it was Sherry Turkle who used the term "alone together." You know, we're in this kind of very odd relationship with the world at the moment, where we're not entirely sure quite what our place is, what our purpose is. And for some, it kind of expresses itself as this great deep set fear that in actual fact maybe human beings aren't the greatest thing. You know, on one side you've got human hubris, which kind of believes, hey, you know, the transhumanist community, we should continue humanity as it is right now. And on the other side you've got this existential dread, these miserabilists who have this, who are also transhumanist friendly, who have this idea that potentially there's something coming around the corner that will destroy us all. And the weird thing about that is there's oddly something comforting about the idea of an an end of humanity, because it gives us an opportunity to start over. You know, I was interviewing the wonderful Thomas Moynihan, and I highly recommend his book X Risk. And Thomas looks at the difference between apocalypse and extinction. An apocalypse is something that was seen to be done by some form of higher entity, by a god, for example, that the world would be, it would come to an end due to the agency of something greater than us. Whereas extinction is much more scary because that's driven by something that we could potentially do to ourselves. And extinction would mean not just the end of humanity, but the end of human culture itself. And a lot of people, they take offense to the idea that humanity could end, but there's a lot of desire for certain forms of human culture to end. There's the odd joke that it's easier to imagine the end of the world than the end of capitalism. Well, people are seeing that, you know, the system, the operating system under which we've built Western civilization doesn't necessarily benefit all of us. And potentially the only way to end that system is to end humanity itself, the people who are perpetuating that form of system. Now, I want to believe, and I desperately do believe, that in actual fact there is a way in which we can fix these things in the present and drive the sort of futures that we want. You call me a futurist in the introduction to this podcast. I much prefer the term propagandist. I mean, a futurist kind of passively sits there and they try and predict the future based on trends and data. A propagandist, on the other hand, they see the sort of future that they want and they try to do as much as they can to engineer the situation out in the world for that future to come to pass. You know, a futurist is a very passive kind of situation, whereas a propagandist, at least they have some form of agency. And I would encourage more people to be propagandists about the sorts of futures that they want to see, rather than be just futurists who are looking at all the terrible things that may come to pass and assuming that it's inevitable. Inevitability is a very, very dangerous assumption that we have about the future.
Why do you care about all this, Luke? I mean, you're a young dude. A lot of, or most of the people your age will have a career or a job that has to do with how many houses can I buy or what can I do, and that's their propaganda, right? How did you end up being in a place where you actually care? Was there anything, a specific moment that triggered that, or it's something that's built on throughout your life?
I could tell you the true story. The true story is 18 years old. I went to university, and a university is a place where you should dare to know. And that's the original mission of the university. I mean, it's certainly become an environment whereby one of the only reasons to go to university is basically to get a job at the end of it. But the true enlightenment mission of the university was to dare to know things that you didn't otherwise
Dare
know,
to ask
and
even,
dare to ask even. And
Yeah.
I sort of fell into transhumanism. That was the first place I ended up at 18 years old. And Liviu, it was a weird way through which I found myself inside of transhumanism. I was originally, and bear in mind I was 18, I was originally fascinated by this idea of the Mayan 2012 apocalypse. There were all these books written by folks
Of
like
course.
Daniel Pinchbeck that were written around 2008, 2009, that something was going to happen on the December 21st, 2012. And there was a weird Venn diagram where there was this kind of spirituality folks who were interested in the Mayan calendar, but also that kind of crossed with some of the transhumanist individuals who were interested in technology and how that was going to affect our future. So I kind of naively read a lot of this stuff when I was much younger, and through the process of reading folks like Peter Russell, who wrote a book called The Global Brain, Daniel Pinchbeck, I eventually ended up starting to read works around transhumanism. And one of the first transhumanists I met was someone who I'm sure the Cyborg Nest community knows, who is Max Moore. I met him at 18 years old in his hotel room in London. I was making a short film at university at the time, and I set up my camera, and he sits down and he goes, "You can ask me any question apart from about the popsicle parties that happen in San Francisco." And from that moment, I was fascinated. I want to know what a popsicle party is. For anyone who doesn't know, it was these parties they're organizing to cryogenically, or talk about cryogenic freezing, or potentially even cryogenically freeze people. It's contested as to what happened at some of those parties. But I was just fascinated from that point onwards. And largely the fascination has come from about these differentiated ways of being human, of understanding both what it means to be human and potentially what it could mean to be human. And it started with these kind of very weird prophecies about the future, a future that would mean some form of end, and ended up in differentiated types of prophecies about the future.
Are you happy with your choice?
Oh, sometimes I do wonder why. It's a funny thing where, what I love about the Futures podcast, and what I love about doing things like this with you, Liviu, is my job is to think, and to think freely. I've always been in an environment where I've engineered a situation where I've given myself the liberty to think what I want in the environment in which I want. And the podcast really is that. Before the podcast, I was organizing a event series called Virtual Futures, which was really about a discovery of what the internet was and what the internet could be. And we did a series of events in London, some of which you even spoke at. And it was always about, how do you find communities of individuals who are interested about these big questions of what it means to be human, and see that through the lens of technology, science, and increasingly so more odd, weird, and wonderful ways of being. That's kind of a very broad way of saying, do I regret it? No. Am I stuck here? Perhaps. But I enjoy every single conversation I have, and every single book I read. It really is. It's an excuse to be interesting, and I'll be interested if you're interesting. So yeah, it's been a labor of love. Sometimes sometimes there are days where I'm just like, what am I doing? But largely, I'm very happy to be exploring these questions.
Isn't it the thing? Because curiosity and exploration, that's the key to everything, right? And that kind of leads to the first part of the conversation about processes that are happening, and some of them might be damaging or not, or might be damaging in the future or in the present. Is there a place where we should say, no, you're not doing that because even if someone is very curious, I mean, not hurting someone. It's not, I'm really curious what will happen if I take your eye off, right? That we understand that that's not okay to do.
Uh-huh.
But in terms of, I don't know, processes or things that are happening in the world today, where do you think are the weak spots that we should, like, that's something to be really careful about?
That's interesting. I mean, I've always been supportive of anybody who's taken a pro-actionary approach to the future. And then that's why I love the biohacking community. That's why I love the Cyborg Nest community, because they are individuals, for large parts, especially some of the hardcore biohackers, they're using their own body as a laboratory. And more than that, they're not just using their own body as a laboratory, but they're feeding back what they're finding to the community. And there's very few things that we truly own in this day and age, but our body is one of those things. And I've always been sympathetic to anybody who's able to look at their own morphology and go, you know what? Hey, what can I do? How can I push the boundaries? A lot of the stuff that I'm doing now was really sparked from meeting a man with an ear in his arm a couple of almost a decade ago now. A man with an ear in his arm, I'm sure this audience would know, is Stellark, the 70-year-old Australian performance artist. And for anybody who's watching this who doesn't know, he quite literally has an ear surgically implanted into his arm. And I remember asking Stellark the question of why. You know, why do you have this ear in your arm? And he sort of looked at me with his wry smile and he goes, well, why not? And what Stellark meant by that was, look, we live in a world of, what was the phrase he used? We live in a world of circulating flesh. You know, which Liviu means, you know, for example, if we're organ donor compatible, your organs could quite literally be inside my body tomorrow. Or if we're the same blood type, your blood could literally be flowing through my body tomorrow. In other words, we live in an age of fascinating biotechnology that allows us to do a multitude of things, and yet the things we choose to do are based on cultural tropes of beauty. We might have thinner noses, higher cheekbones, plumper lips, larger breasts, larger, you know, other organs. You can, I'm sure you can imagine. And surely, if we have the biotechnology that allows us to put an ear in our arm, then why not? It makes complete and utter sense. Not having an ear in your arm is almost a failure of imagination. If that's a possibility that's available to us, then why not pursue these things for the sake of pursuing them? What might we learn through this process of engaging in these sort of very hyper experimental interventions? And that's always fascinated me. They're taking this pro-actionary approach as opposed to a precautionary approach, one that sees science and technology as something which is constantly a threat that we should constantly be looking at with some form of suspicion, and that we should always, you know, take these precautions, these massive precautions, which often hinder certain forms of innovation. To your question of, is there anything that we shouldn't do? Well, we shouldn't do certain things that may lead to massive loss of life. But the one thing that the transhumanist community needs to realize is that the sorts of visions that they have do require blood to be spilt. And we always seem to forget that. You know, if you really want to engage in hyper experimental drug trials or individual trials to maintain your life beyond, quote unquote, a natural lifespan, then you're probably going to have to, at some point, test these things on human beings. And there's a beautiful science fiction short story written by David Eagleman, which says the tragedy of the idea of mind uploading, for example, of taking whatever consciousness is and trying to put it into a computer, is that the only way that we can make that happen is that we will never know if it worked. You know, so we'd have to kill the patient at the point of mind upload, but we would never be able to guarantee if they were able to transfer their consciousness into a machine. So, you know, when we talk about these ideas, we need to reconstitute everything we think about what it means to be human, and the way in which we do that is just taking these risks. If anything, what it means to be human in the 21st century is about a certain form of risk taking.
So if we could take the same point, and you know, people like David Eagleman, like ourselves, like many other people that decide to make a step, right, and to do something in not so far past years. I mean, if you go 20, 30 years ago, the world was run by governments, right? Today, the world is run by companies. The governments are almost those that are responsible for taking the trash out and you know, minimal stuff. And it's almost like they are interfering the world to run itself with their bullshit, right? And I assume that that happened because people thought the same way that we think of, hey, I have an idea. It's not a bad idea. I'm not going to hurt people probably. And I want to make it happen. So fuck it. I'm just going to make it happen. Right. So we got to a place where people kind of took control on what is happening. Have we gone too far with that? Is it a place where are we in a place where we are again going to lose control, or we have already lost control to another new type of entity controlling us that is not someone we can choose in elections, that it's not someone. So have we basically created a new type of I wouldn't call it dictators, but a new type of long-standing empires that is impossible now to remove or to do anything about it?
Well, I think what you're talking about there, Liviu, is the underlying operating system that runs at least Western corporate capitalism. You know, we have this kind of weird mechanistic worldview, this machinic mechanistic worldview where we assume that basically all that human beings are a form of machine that we can extract something from, you know, whether that's labor, whether that's capital, whether that's something else. You know, we see human beings only within that context because of the environment in which we've constructed for ourselves. And this is my, if anything, this is my only critique of the whole cyborg narrative. It's the fact that we're engineering humanity for an operating system that we created for a certain form of technological, or in the name, sorry, of a certain form of technological progress. And it's the progress narrative that's very problematic, that's very potentially disruptive and destructive. And what I mean by that is, you know, the history of Western civilization has always been, how do we grow? How do we increase our yield? And the ways in which we've done that traditionally has been get on boats, go find more land. It's the Adam Smith issue of land, labor, and capital. What are the limitations of growth? Well, land, labor, and capital. So what do? We get on boats and we take land from people who already own that land, and we extract the resources from that in order to which in order, sorry, to grow economically. And in the 21st century, we've almost tied economic progress to the idea of human progress. And what we need to do, if anything, is separate those two and realize that humanity may not be progressing under extractive corporate capitalism. If anything, it may be regressing, you know, and that's not about the failure of the human being. That's the failure about the environment in which we're swimming, in which we're living. These are not necessarily healthy based environments. And some of the cyborg narrative, and it's certainly not one that CyborgNest advocate for, but some of the cyborg narrative is around, how do we become more competitive in the market? How does the human being compete with the coming age of something like AI? And we are told these narratives that AI is going to be so much more efficient than us, is going to be so much more a better worker than us. And the solution to that is something like Neuralink. Well, what we should do
But
is,
isn't that exactly the point that I was talking about? Because if you look at politicians, they've been using throughout history fear as a mean to sell themselves, right? And the moment I saw Elon Musk saying that we have to develop Neuralink because otherwise we will become the pets of our computers, I was like, dude, you're spreading fear. Is that is
but at the same time, he's
is
also
that
developing Tesla AI. So in terms of
is that
creating the market,
is that the way to convince people that we actually need that? I mean,
Mm.
Why that way? I mean, there are so many good reasons why we'd need to create human machine interfaces for so many positive thoughts. Why coming and selling we have to? Because, or the same thing happened with him, by the way, about his mission to Mars, which I think is a
Mm.
very cool mission. But his way of selling it is Earth is going to be destroyed. We have to find another home. So people are
Mm.
like, of course, it's the end. We have to go to Mars because we are doomed, right? But we are
Mm.
not doomed. Nothing has, I mean, shit is happening, but we are not in a place where we need to start thinking about a new home. How about thinking about how we can save or redo some of the things that we did wrong on this planet.
Mm.
So same thing when when people speak about ask me why do we need to have more senses, and I say, but we live on this planet, we need to connect to it, we need to understand it, we need to
Mm.
be part of it as much as we can, and to communicate with this piece of rock that we live in, because I think that there is a chain of first you sense something, then you understand something, and when you understand something you start respecting that something,
Mm.
right? So that's how it works in the human brain. So the more we sense, the more we understand, and then the more we will respect. Because if you didn't know that there are trees, you wouldn't respect them, because you don't know they are there, so who gives the fuck, right? But we know they are there, so we want to take care of them, we want to take care of the
Mm.
forest, we want to do that. So where is a place where uh, uh, these companies or us as humanity could stop spreading and selling fear, and try to sell something that is positive? And I think that a lot of it has to do with the word that you used called progress,
Mm.
because we are obsessed with the progress thing. What is the progress that we did? Where is the next step? I mean, is there a definition to progress that you see that we are following, or we should follow?
I mean, you almost captured it in what you said there, Liviu. The mission of Cyborg Nest is to create a relationship with the environment in which we already live. And the environment we believe we live in is one of digital technology. The sort of mid 90s vision of the cyborg was always about dealing with and to quote Starlock again, the hyper-threading processes of modern connectivity. Basically, it was a fear that AI, computers, the internet, they would be so much more efficient and therefore better than human beings. But what if efficiency isn't the thing that makes humanity great? What if it's something slightly more nuanced? What if our future isn't one of integrating with cybernetics, but it's reintegrating with the environment? And something like the North Sense, which orients you due north, it alerts you to the fact that, hey, we are of this planet, a planet which has these uh,
Magnetic fields, yeah.
electromagnetic fields, and it's I mean, it's been said that potentially human beings had the ability to orient due north in the same way that birds do when they migrate. We don't quite know what that sense is, but they innately know that, hey, this is the thing that we should do during migration. And we've offloaded so much of our being to shiny glowing rectangles that we forget that we are of this environment. So instead of focusing on cybernetics, perhaps we should focus on chronobiology, biology of time, a relationship that sees the body as situated not in an environment of digital technology, but one of the earth and of the planet, and realize that because we've created artificial light, because we're staring at these shiny glowing rectangles, we've divorced ourselves from things as simple as circadian rhythms. A lot of the challenges that human beings are dealing with, the mental issues that human beings are dealing with, are really generated by false expectations of the market and not expectations of nature. The reason people are so stressed is because, oh God, I have to work
You
nine to
need to
five. I'm
deliver.
staring.
You need
Yeah,
to
you need to
deliver.
deliver. You need to be productive, and
Of
that's
course.
and that's what's problematic about these situations of large corporations providing meditation to their workforce. The reason they're providing meditation to their workforce is so they can make a more efficient
Of course.
worker. It's not because they want to
They
deal with
don't
the
care.
underlying problems of the stress that the worker has. If they really cared about that, they'd re-engineer the environment in which the work is being done, not force people into environments whereby, you know, they're only meditating so that they are more productive from 9 a.m. in the morning to 1 p.m. And it's really about asking those questions of why are we engaging in these certain forms of activity. I think the most fascinating thing about you, Liviu, and it's a discussion we had on the Futures podcast when you were a guest on my show, was despite all of the technology that you're creating at Cyborg Nest, one of your practices is ice baths.
Yeah.
And you find that as enhancing to your being human as anything else that you do. And that was fascinating to me. The fact that you have this practice that you perform every single day to situate yourself within your body as a maker of tools and technologies that arguably are additions to the body. That was fascinating to me.
But that's the point, I think, because I was never fascinated about technology as technology. I mean, it's not. I don't see anything exciting when I look at a chip. You know, when I look at a something, it's like how can that be used to create impact? That's what kind of triggers me. And you know, on a personal level, yes, it can be ice baths or breathing exercises or having new senses, but I think that's what people need to look for. So if we because unfortunately we are getting close to the end of it, but if we, you know, the obvious questions that people ask many times, if we have younger audience that's listening to us, or even not younger, people that want to do something, right, have an idea, how should they approach that? How should they tackle what they want to do in life without getting and falling into the same obvious holes of, because there is a bit of danger in what we said as well before, because we said, yeah, it's all about delivering and all that. And people might think that we are exactly the opposite of, oh, doesn't matter, bro. If it didn't work out, it didn't work out. And you can do nothing today. And you don't need to stand behind deadlines. It's not important. And that's not what we are trying to say, I imagine. It's to find that balance where maybe we are call it productive or efficient, but without it being a burden on ourselves or on people around us, on the planet, on humanity, but doing it in a smart way. So how do you think someone that has an idea should approach it? What should they do?
I mean, the first question they should ask themselves is whether their idea increases the resilience of a human being. As opposed to looking at a problem and trying to find a way to outsource that problem to technology, ask whether it makes the human being stronger to deal with that situation. So, I mean, we're dealing with this discussion now with regards to whether Facebook causes great harm to younger individuals, you know, or Instagram or any of these platforms, whether they're harming, I guess, individuals and human beings, especially teenage individuals who may develop certain forms of body dysmorphia looking at these platforms. And the question, and I guess the solution to that is always, let's regulate these platforms. Let's go in and let's make sure that we change the fundamental underlying technology so that we're not feeding these images to our children. No, the thing that we should be doing is increasing the resilience of the human child so that when they look at these images on Instagram, they see them as so stupid, as a product of marketing, as something that is a simulation of reality. And by strengthening human resilience as opposed to just regulating technology, people can look at these things with a wry smile and dismiss them and not internalize them. That's the sort of work we should be doing, not the sort of work that just looks at technology as the problem and then kind of rejects the idea that human beings have a say in this. You know, the underlying assumption is always, oh, human beings are so stupid that they can't deal with the fact that these algorithms are feeding them certain things. No, human beings are really, really smart and they can deal with this stuff, but provide them with the tools to deal with a new relationship, I guess, with media and social media, rather than trying to create a protectionist bubble around what they consume.
Luke, last question. You worked with the BBC, with Douglas Rushkoff, with whoever. You spoke to all the big scientists in the world, with all the big names and all that, and you're still very young. What do you want to be when you'll be a grown up? What's the dream?
I could give you the Peter Pan answer, which is I never want to grow up, Liviu. I want to stay young and interested forever. Well, that's the transhumanist answer. I want to stay at 30 and live forever. I've never believed in living forever. Honestly, Liviu, I love doing what I do in terms of science communication, and the real goal for me is how do you do this sort of thing at scale? I've always looked at the wonderful science communicators like Carl Sagan. In the UK, we have someone called Professor Brian Cox, and I've seen how they've created situations whereby they're able to create platforms that allow them to reach a lot of people with these ideas. And that's really slowly but surely what I'm trying to do in my own career. I'm at least a decade from that. Right now, I'm in the building stage of just, understanding some of these core ideas and developing that point of view so that when the BBC comes to call, and they're welcome to come to call at any time, I'm ready to take up that mantle of being the Brian Cox of the future. I mean, I mean that facetiously to some degree, but I also mean that very seriously. There's such a wonderful thing to be able to be a science communicator like that, because it gives you a license to platform the ideas that you really, really care about, as opposed to consistently and constantly kind of begging institutions to take the ideas that you're interested in seriously. That's the only reason to really do
I
that.
have to ask you another question now.
Go on.
So if that, I mean, why do people like yourself and myself do not? Because if we go back 50 years ago, right? Being a mayor of a town was like something very cool. Being in politics, people would go into politics because they thought that they have the power and they had the power to implement ideas and stuff. How come we are not there? Because looking at what you've just said now, you're basically speaking about a future healthy education system, right? So why not doing that through there?
Well, it ties back to your point around Elon Musk. You know, if you want to critique Elon Musk, then that's fine, and I'm certainly no Elon Musk fanboy. But the thing about Elon Musk is that he has the ability to mimetically impact the future. You know, there's three ways that people, or there's three desires that people have when they're trying to impact the future. Is profitability, it's politics, and sometimes it's personal. And people will make espousals and they'll make predictions about those things to drive those three narratives. In the case of some transhumanists, they make these large proclamations about the sorts of technology that will aid us to live forever in the hope that they can personally live forever. In politics, we've seen it happen multiple times. We had Kennedy going, we're not doing it because it's easy, we're doing it because it's hard. And he drove the entire space race. You know, it was this idea that if America owned the future, then they own the present. And that was so important for politically changing how people thought. And with Elon Musk, it's done to a large degree for profit, and it's done successfully. Elon Musk can say something on Twitter about battery technology, about space travel, and you can see the affect that has in the present. You can quite literally see that through the valuation of something like Bitcoin,
yeah.
You know, or his stock market valuations for Tesla. You know, he has this thing called mimetic power. He can open the Overton window. He can get people excited about these certain forms of future. And that doesn't happen as some form of proclamation that may or may not come to pass. It changes things in the actual present. His ideas and the way in which he expresses them at scale have libidimal power, which can drive the future that he chooses and wants to see come to pass. And that goes back to my point at the beginning of this podcast about being a propagandist, to have the ability to engineer the sorts of futures that you truly want to see, as opposed to just believe that the future is a thing that's going to happen to you. That's what's so important in this day and age. And it's not something that should be left to just professional futurists. It's something that everybody can engage with. Everybody has a say over the sort of future, personal future that they want to create for themselves. It then holds that they also have some form of say over the collective future that they want to create for all of us.
My dear friend, you've been here before us, and I'm sure that you're gonna be here after all of us are gone.
Oh God, let's hope not. The world will be a lot less interesting place.
No, exactly the opposite. I think you're bringing a very positive and healthy type of thinking. Obviously, behind every type of thinking, some people can agree and some can disagree. But it's very easy to distinguish between a healthy thinking that you might agree with or not, and a non-healthy type of thinking that you look at it and you're like, that's bad news. So you're definitely good news, and please stay around. And we look forward to seeing a lot of your future work coming out. Thank you so much for being here and for supporting us throughout the years. And I'm sure that this is not the last time that we're going to do something together. Thank you so much, my friend.
Thank you. Thank you for letting me be a guest on the Cyborg Nest podcast.
Yes. Cheers. Thanks for all the people that listened, and hope that we see you guys soon in our next chapter. Cheers.